Ever since she was integrated into Godzilla's canon, Mothra never had the opportunity of headlining another monster movie, being relegated to hanging around Godzilla whenever convenient. A shame really, as her debut flick was a major turning point for the genre, not to mention a great film overall. Not that there was an attempt at bringing Mothra back in a starring position, but all those attempts amounted to nothing, as kaiju movies in general were pretty much dead through most of the 70s and 80s. Things got a little brighter at the turn of that decade with the new and somewhat financially sustainable Heisei Godzilla films. The landscape prompted screenwriter Akira Murao to start developing the script for a new Mothra flick, in which he would battle a creature named Bagan. Toho, uncertain of the character's appeal overseas, shut down the project, focusing entirely in its Godzilla ventures. Now, all of this I've already covered in my video about Godzilla vs Mothra, which incorporated elements of the aborted script into its own. And as you might remember, that film was a huge hit, which might explain why Toho decided to greenlight a new Mothra solo movie right after temporarily retiring Godzilla in the mid-90s. And thus came to be Rebirth of Mothra, and its two sequels, a trilogy completely unrelated to Mothra's previous appearance, but which clearly carry its DNA. Two of the most distinguished characteristics of that movie are its tone, a clearly throwback to the more light-hearted ones from the Showa era, and its ecological message. Both of these elements return front and center for these new films, with all three featuring children as protagonists, and the first two explicitly mentioning the villain's awakening as a result of humans messing up with the environment. In fact, in the case of the first movie, the similarities run so deep they make the whole experience have an overwhelming derivative feel to it. Once again, we have a movie that features humanity accidentally awakening a monster that had been sealed away millions of years ago by an ancient civilization driven to the brink of collapse by said monster. This civilization having, of course, survived through two small ladies who take care of the giant insect Mothra. Even though not to this extent, the sequels also run on the same logic, putting Mothra against a monster responsible for some past calamity just for it to be defeated and eventually brought back thanks to some magic shenanigan. I know that by this point I shouldn't expect much in terms of original ideas, but I hoped for more than to see the exact same plot recycled 3 times in a row. Amusingly enough, even though this film relies heavily on overused plot points from the franchise, it still managed to slip in a fresh coat of paint on top of all that. A recurring thing with these movies was to try to evoke a sense of childlike wonder, the kind of which was missing from the Heisei era Godzilla flicks, which took a turn for the darker-ish. Rebirth accomplishes this by framing the action with your typical child empowerment story, featuring kids running around places they totally shouldn't be in, escaping evil grown-ups, interacting with beings of enormous power while helping them overcome their own struggles and save the day. It just oozes that low-budget kids adventure feel, and I'm using this expression in a flattering manner. The funny part is that this is unlike anything this franchise has ever seen, as no Toho movie has ever featured a child as a protagonist, except that one we don't like to talk about. This has always been more of a Gamera thing. Godzilla and his peers sure used to star in more light-hearted adventures, but never went the wish fulfillment role, which makes the whole genre throwback stick this trilogy proposes itself to be to feel like a slightly misguided venture. Regardless, the movies are totally geared towards a younger audience, which doesn't excuse them from being so lazy, and now I'm not talking just about the plot. This is one of those films where the monsters are confined to the countryside, a forest usually, which is the easiest way to tell how much money they pour into a flick. Or not pour in this case. Not satisfied with just that though, these movies insist on making pretty much all the action take place around the exact same geographical place. All of it. This is a new low for kaiju flicks, I swear. Even worse though is that they actually tried to shoot some scenes of urban destruction for the trilogy, but they all consist of shots of the monsters superimposed over footage of actual cities. I don't dislike this technique, it works fine for the sake of establishing shots and giving more scale to the destruction, but the effect falls flat on its face if it's the only way for the characters in our movie to get near a building. When it's not employing subpar practical effects, the production relies heavily on digital ones. It is a first for the genre to extensively make use of this kind of trick, and you can tell that crew is still trying to learn how to use the technology. Now, to be fair, with that in mind, some of the CGI in the film looks less like cutting corners and more like sincere experimentations, as there are several scenes that could not have been conceived without the heavy use of digital effects. Many of the scenes in question have a feverishly surreal nature to them, which for me make evident their more exploratory nature. But unless you are into this kind of aesthetic, I would argue you won't have much of a fun time watching moments like with all this talk of experimenting with new special effects techniques, you have to wonder how come the rest of the films range from uninspired to just plain bad. The action sequences in special are a bore to watch, dragging for way too long while the monsters try to hit each other with lasers until Mothra gets down and have to be resurrected later, this time to deliver a curb stomp in the villain. The filmmakers get props for trying to spice things up by giving the hero new powers, but like I said, Mothra uses these new powers so decisively against these enemies that they end up feeling like a cheap way to finish the movie instead of being the start of a dynamic new fight. Lack of money justifies the limited choice of sets of these films, but doesn't justify the lack of creativity and lazy writing in them. When it comes to cutting corners while also making something entertaining, these Japanese men sure could learn something from their fellow countrymen from the animation industry. Is this me saying positive things about anime? Yes, don't get used to it. The reason why Toho decided to make these films in the first place is a mystery to me, as they were very clearly penny-pinching every single aspect of the flicks, from special effects to acting, which goes to show how little faith they had in the brand. As egregious as the idea might sound in hindsight, there is a chance they were using Mothra as a poor man's substitute for Godzilla while he was on vacation. It may be a coincidence that this trilogy neatly fills the gap left by Godzilla's retirement, and with or without the 1999 film, Mothra wouldn't get a fourth adventure. But all this timing is way too convenient for me to ignore. In the end, these films plus Orochi the Eight-Headed Dragon probably proved to Toho that the genre outside of Godzilla was absolutely inviable, as they never made another non-Goji monster flick after the third Mothra. Rebirth of Mothra had its heart in the right place, I will admit that. It tried to be an honest and light-hearted adventure for children, which is fine on its own right, but doesn't excuse the movie from being plain bad, especially considering a few years later Gamera the Brave would do the exact same thing while managing to be a much better film. On the other hand, I can kinda forgive the below average special effects, partially because I understand the financial restrictions the crew was under while making the movies, but mostly because this is clearly the first time they had to deal with digital effects. While not the best looking effects around, it was a learning experience for the parties involved, and while it would take a while, they would eventually manage to convincingly blend this kind of technology with more traditional techniques. So, in a way, you could say Mothra crawl so that Kiryu could fly. Until that happened though, we had to swallow a slog of a trilogy that overstayed its welcome some 3 times over and almost made me fall asleep more than once. But as always, I can count on at least one of you liking this crap, so please, Tell me how much I am wrong in the comments below. It boosts the algorithm.